Okay, this is a rerun of last Thursday's Zoom meeting about the Rendlesham Forest Incident, 1980, and it's for people who, for various reasons, weren't able to watch the live Zoom. So this is the general region around Rendlesham Forest. Rendlesham Forest is it's basically a forestry commission plantation. It's used as a crop, so in other words, the pine trees that are there are chopped down on a regular basis and replanted. So the profile of the forest is nothing like it was back in 1980. Over here you've got Ipswich, this is southern Suffolk, that's the North Sea. And you can see here the incredible runway at Woodbridge, the main runway. It's so wide, you could actually land a light plane across the width of it. A very important airbase during the Second World War. And its twin base Bentwaters over here were passed across to the Americans after the Second World War and developed into the site that became notorious in 1980. So here's the end of the runway. Here's the forest. As you can see, because the trees are cropped on a frequent basis, there's often new clearings where there were none in 1980. But you can still, some of the basic tracks, this track here, track 10, did exist in 1980, as did the one here along the eastern boundary. That region here of agricultural land, arable land, is called Capel Green. Folly House is a well-known local landmark. I remember watching a red-footed falcon from there a couple of years ago. Here's track 10 going down into the woods. It's most people's preferred entry into the woods. I have to say, the last time we went, all this here had been cut down. The famous East Gate, which was appears in the title of one of the first books written on the subject, Turn Left at East Gate, is down there. And this is the track taken into the forest by Penniston and Burroughs in 1980. Okay, the Woodbridge Air Base, although it wasn't known at the time, or at least it wasn't admitted at the time, was the largest store of nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom, possibly in Europe. And these bunkers held virtually all the warheads, which was tactical and strategic warheads, that would have been rapidly deployed in Western Europe in the event of nuclear war or build up to nuclear war. I mean, the whole region around Woodbridge has a history of all kinds of secret goings on. There's only a few of them there now, but you can see these huge aerials. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. This is the control center. This facility was called Cobra Mist, and the object building it during the Cold War was to eavesdrop on Soviet communications over the horizon. It apparently wasn't particularly successful, so I don't think it was ever completely deployed. And although Bentwaters, the twin base, has now been largely turned over to industrial or commercial units, there are parts of it which, this was taken maybe 5 years ago, which seem to be still in modern use. While we were there, these fans, these ventilation fans, were actually operating. You could hear them. So although most of the airbase is now turned over to commercial use, there's a small Cold War museum there, which is worth a visit. You just wonder, as is the case with Woodbridge, how much of it is still used, the underground components particularly. So this is a quick history of the thing. Around just after midnight, December the 26th, 1980, a couple of members of the base security team sight strange lights in the forest and leave Eastgate to investigate. This is Penniston and Burroughs. They report lights in the forest and in the sky. We'll see more about that later, particularly next week. At daybreak, they return later, the same day, and find shallow depressions, broken branches, scuffed tree bark. And the lights are reported to have returned a couple of days later. The deputy base commander, Charles Halt, got a party together with lighting units called light-alls. You'll hear those referred to occasionally. He entered the forest just after midnight and they explored for several hours. They saw strange lights in the forest to the east over the airbase. They reported seeing bright light shining a beam down towards the weapons storage system at facility at Bentwaters. Holt tapes the events on a microcassette, which has become, it's available all over the internet. It's very well known, and has radiation measurements taken too. There's been a lot of dispute about whether or not they're significant, because they're only slightly raised. Slightly raised isn't none, is it? And it was in the region of the reported landing where Holt and a crew of security personnel saw the object for some time. The foliage, the trees, and the ground around there did definitely have a heightened or enhanced radiation reading. This is, I don't know if you'll be able to hear this on this recording, but this would be the famous Holt recording of events. And just quickly see if I can, no, I can't. But he basically, you can look it up online and listen to it. He basically reports he and his men are watching a light, which he describes as being like a blinking eye, and occasionally, as you can see, what looks like molten metal drip off it. It moves to the woods, they follow it, and eventually they end up in a clear area. Steve Longero is one of the more recent eyewitnesses to come forward, and he was guarding one of the nuclear weapons facilities when he saw and reported lights over the forest. It's often, misreported online that it was Penniston, it was Burroughs, it was Larry Warren, just one or two others. It wasn't. It was the actual initial object over and in the woods was reported by numerous people. Not all of them have been prepared to come forward. Steve Longero did quite recently. As he says, it was kind of quiet, this thing hovering over the trees, and it was following, it was watching us like blah, blah, blah. He described the UFO as looking like red and green fluorescent lights hovering over the treetops. It's unclear whether he was in one of the various watchtowers here. I should say that the forest, if you visited it now, as I say, it's nothing like the original, as it was in 1980. For example, this is what they call the security kiosk at the East Gate, which is the eastern entrance, if you like, the back entrance, of course, to RAF Woodbridge, the American Air Base. And you can see it's hardly secure at all. But the thing about it is you can't see particularly well in this picture, but the whole area around it was levelled, nothing above. This is just a little bit of foliage around the security shack, just to, I don't know, make it look pretty, I suppose. But the whole area around it, as was customary with secure bases in those days, and still is, was levelled. Just grass. The reason being that you don't want terrorists or infiltrators to be able to sneak up through, to the wire and cut their way through. Now, if you go there, you can see there's the security shack in this region here, and you can see the whole area around it has grown up considerably. And there's a new gate. This gate wasn't there in 1980. The only path thing to stop you going straight, driving straight, was, as usual, a pole across there. So that's how, as it is. The most recent photographs I've taken of it was just a year or two ago. This is actually a pile of wood chippings. They've cleared away some of the area on the left here. But this is a new gate. In fact, you can see there's new gate, there's new, if you visit, there's razor wire. That Woodbridge Air Base is not completely decommissioned. It's used for training exercises by commando. It's also at the base for an engineering squadron or regiment. But I've seen Apache helicopters land there. I've seen various jets and light aircraft land there. And it's obviously because it's still a secure area, it's used from time to time for various exercises. I mean, we've been there and seen commandos yomping through the woods with machine guns, submachine guns. Anyway, this is, as I said, the pathway along the eastern side of the woods, eastern track. Over to the right here is Capel Green. This is the last stand of trees before the open air. And this trackway here is what leads you through to where the UFO reportedly landed. This is the Capel Green. In this particular case, it seems to have barley growing there. But I mean, I've seen onions there. I've seen potatoes, obviously. This is an artist's impression of Halt and his men walking across Capel Green when suddenly a beam of light was shone down in front of them. In fact, in Halt's account, he says it was not much wider than a pencil, effectively a laser beam. The good thing about this realisation is you'll notice nobody's carrying any sidearms or long arms. It's a great, it really does quite annoy me that the number of people who write about or talk about the forest, they seem to be unaware of the fact there's a regulation against carrying weapons off the base, and so they didn't. It's Pennison at one point did say that he did have a sidearm, but he locked it in a locker on the Jeep before he got out. As Holt and his men wandered around following the light and trying to to keep tabs on it, they walked across Capel Green. They walked through a belt of trees. This is all mentioned in his own personal account in an excellent book written by my friend John Hanson, which is called well, we'll see that later on. But Charles Holt has collaborated on 2 books with John Hanson, and they give a full account of his ramblings that night. The reason, and you'll see that in the middle of these woods is a shallow stream. And Holt gives us the reason they returned to the base was not because the incident finished, that there were no more lights buzzing around the sky. In fact, they were watching them as they returned to the base. It's just the fact that walking through these woods, the men got their trousers and ankle and feet very wet, and he was worried about them because it was December. He was worried about them getting hypothermia or becoming ill. At the end of that little track that I said goes into the woods, there used to be this 3 telegraph pole stumps but to show the actual landing site. And even when I first visited the woods in the 1985, 86, something like that. I mean, I was aware of it earlier than then, but the first time I remember actually consciously going there looking, you could still see a circular area of cleared canopy overhead this area, and you can see it's still lit up. It's still lit by the sun, even though it's in the middle of the wood. There is actually a kind of glady area where the UFO allegedly landed. Holt's boss asked or instructed him to write a memo, which was sent off to the Ministry of Defence, effectively burying the whole thing. But the memo is quite interesting because it's quite specific, and you bear in mind this is a flag officer in the American Air Force writing this. It's it pulls no punches, as you can read it online or read it here if you like. You can see later in the night a red sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point it appeared, and so on and so forth. So it's a full account of the 2 nights' adventures in the woods. Now, the person who broke the story, or the people who broke the story, really were these 2 here, Brenda and Dot, and Brenda Butler particularly has become a kind of a feature, an ever-present feature of the Rendlesham Forest story. Dot Street and Brenda Butler, together with the author Jenny Randalls, published the first book on the subject a couple of years after the event, which I suppose, after the famous splash headlines in the News of the World, I think in 1984, soon after Holt's memo was made public after a Freedom of Information request. Soon after that, Brenda Butler, Dot Street, and Jenny Randalls published a book. That's them as they are now. They're virtually guaranteed to turn up at any event in and around Woodbridge. And that's the book Sky Crash, and it's quite a good read. I mean, they're on this. Brenda lives in just up the road at Leiston, and it's she was on the spot quite early. She had visited the base on many occasions, and she was familiar with many of the personnel, including Colonel Holt, before all this and afterwards, and built up quite a good relation with him. These are, if you like, the main players. Penniston and Burrows, he was sergeant and an airman. They were the two that actually, according to most people, but not all, were the first and only people to come to get close to the landed UFO on the first night. Colonel Charles Holt, who was the deputy base commander, he went on to be the base commander. He led the party in on the second occasion the object was seen on the ground. This photograph was taken. You remember earlier I mentioned that the team went back. A team, a security team, went into the forest again on the first morning once it was daylight, and they found these scrapings or shallow excavations. And they also found chunks and burned areas in these trees. This is one of the local constabulary investigators. Their conclusion was that the scrapings were done by animals digging, and that the marks on the trees were made by foresters just marking trees next to be cut down. The depressions in the ground did form a equilateral triangle, and Holt had plaster casts made, one of which I've seen, and they're hemispherical, shallow, and you can see about 6 or 8 inches across. Looking for a simple explanation. Well, it's a funny thing. So as soon as something interesting, mysterious, it doesn't fit the profile, there'll always be somebody who dives in there and tries to dismiss it. And the guy generally who's the chief dismisser or skeptic about Rendlesham Forest is Ian Ridpath. Something of an astronomer. He's written 1 or 2 books for children about constellations and the mythology of them. He was, to hear him talk, you'd think he was. At least I'm honest about my involvement in astronomy. Like me, he's got a degree in it, but I think you hear him talk, you think it was the astronomer royal, which he isn't. But he's also, I'm sure he's a wonderful chap. But what he does, he does distort or bend or adapt or meddle with reality to make his point. For example, this is a photograph I took of, while it was still there, it's been demolished now, of the area looking across Capel Green, that's Green Farm, looking over to the east. And through this gap in the distant trees, you can, with a pair of binoculars, you can see Orford Ness Lighthouse. Now, as we'll see in a second, Ian Ridpath is adamant that's the main thing that the airmen and later the Holt crew were looking at. And you can see it happens by coincidence to be, which, as you probably can guess by the very short expanse of cleared woodland there, you can only see it from a very tiny part of the forest. You can only see it from a small section near where there used to be a picnic table on the very edge of the woodland at Capel Green. This is the picture that Ridpath is fond of using, as if the thing lowers over the forest, sending its beam right across and so on and so on. It's mythology. I've seen the beam, from the forest on many occasions, but you can only see it right from the very edge, and you can only see it from one small section of about 20 or 30 meters. That's all. And you can see why. Here's the region of the forest, where the landing reputedly landed here, and yet you're supposed to believe the guys were following around the woods and then walking around Capel Green, looking at a lighthouse beam from the lighthouse right across here, right across through Orford, and Orford Ness Lighthouse is here, about 6 miles away. It's just ludicrous. And the original author of this theory, if you like, about the lighthouse was a forester called Vince Thurkettle, and he this is a quote he made at the time. UFO believers have talked to lighthouse keepers who said it never beamed towards the land, and I think rubbish. It did. You can see it from the woods, or you could until it was demolished. as I said here, the previous images were taken in 2010. The lighthouse couldn't be seen at all from any other part of the forest, right? The reason given by Ian Ridpath for this is that the new lamp was only 13% as bright as the original. Well, if you look on the official Trinity House website, you'll find that the new lamp had a luminosity of 635,000 candelas, fractionally less, not 13%, fractionally less than the original one at the time of the 1989, and it had an identical range of 25 miles. I'm told that at times there was a screen to stop it shining into the town and westwards, but so you could definitely see it. When the last time I saw it, before it was demolished, you could see the light, but it's just a pinprick, a tiny little pinprick of light. It's like when you go to Paris and you see the Arc de Triomphe has these rotating searchlights. You can see those all over Paris. They sweep across the top of the houses, illuminating high points. It's nothing like that. As it says here, another relevant fact, the eastern horizon is seen looking across Capel Green, now obscured by the growth of trees, but the ultimate light was still visible. So is it really believable? I don't think it's just nonsense that American Air Force personnel who'd been based there for some time didn't know that the lighthouse was there, didn't know that the ship-washed lightship was there. Of course they did. What's interesting is that Mr. Thurkettle is now a professional gold prospector in Wales. He was on the telly literally a couple of nights ago on, believe it or not, on Antiques Road Trip. And this is what he says now, bearing in mind he was the bloke who was instrumental in perpetrating the lighthouse. Rendlesham will live and live. It's the second biggest UFO incident in the world. Whatever happened there 25 years ago, something was enough to make strong and intelligent men scared and write letters. Blah, blah, blah. This is a quote from 2005, some years ago, but he's still of that opinion. What always baffles me, why would we give credibility, to somebody who's basically a very young forester thrust into the limelight by Ian Ridpath, who really, where's his credibility? None. Okay. Another explanation often given is that there was at the time a highly trained group of the 67th Recovery Group, and their basic job, as we'll see in a minute, was to, at the times of the Apollo missions between, as we all know, 1967 and 1972, the NASA had to allow for the possibility that an Apollo mission would abort to landing. So, if the engines were not burning at full speed, if full power, if a couple of them cut down and the thing didn't crash, the capsule could have carried on across the Atlantic and splashed down in the Eastern Atlantic. In the same way that there were recovery sites scheduled for the shuttle in a similar situation, one of which was Woodbridge, but also one in Spain and elsewhere. The idea being that there were a slim chance that an Apollo mission could end early with a capsule splashing down in the, I don't see how it would get in the North Sea, but in the Atlantic, and they would be expected to go and recover it with helicopters. So they have this thing, these are called boilerplate capsules, and there are a couple of dozen of these made, and they can be seen now in museums all over America. This one was based at Woodbridge briefly, and it was used for training purposes. But of course, you have to bear in mind that the Apollo missions ended in 1972, which is 8 years before the Rendlesham Forest incident. Although it is true to say that the boilerplate capsule hung around at the base for a long time, it was tucked away in a corner. It certainly wasn't still being used for training in 1980. This is a photograph that occasionally appears. It's supposed to show a Russian spacecraft being retrieved. And I don't know what this aircraft is. It looks like the back end of a C-130 or something like that, a big, but this is supposed to be a Soviet satellite that this 67th Air Rescue and Recovery Squadron have retrieved. And you'll find that it's often occasionally stated anyway that that's what the Rendlesham Forest incident was. We hear that it could have been a fireball, an exploding meteor. Well, that's, if I've got any area of expertise, it's in meteoritics. I'm Britain's only full-time professional meteoriticist, and I run a business called Space Rocks, and we, meteors and meteorites are my business. So, that's what I studied, and my enthusiasm. People has been said it was a Russian Cosmos spy satellite burning up in the atmosphere in this spectacular fashion. I don't quite see how that in any way resembles a strange triangular-shaped craft moving through woods, but there we go. Explanations offered in the media then. The light from the distant lighthouse, or we've dealt with that, a lightship, stars, planets, aircraft. The botched recovery of an Apollo boilerplate capsule. I mean, some people go as far to say they were doing a night recovery exercise and bashed into the landing lights at the end of the runway, and then somehow contrived to then drop the thing 3/4 of a mile further east. Well, I don't know. The re-entry of the Cosmos 749 satellite, or the recovery capture of a Soviet satellite, or a bright fireball, a deliberate hoax by members of the SAS is strange. A story went round some time back that the SAS had been involved in some kind of joint operation, joint trainings with the base personnel at the Bentwaters Woodbridge complex, and that they'd been, during the exercise, some had been captured and been treated very badly, been beaten, been waterboarded, all kinds of nonsense. I had the good fortune to speak to a very famous, I won't say his name, but a very famous SAS veteran at one of the autograph shows that Lyndon and I used to attend, and he said, "That's a load of rubbish, stuff and nonsense." If it had happened, he'd have heard about it. He was still based at Hereford at that time, and he said nothing like that would ever have been allowed. I mean, anybody mistreating SAS personnel in that way would have found himself court-martialed. Another one that's, that some guy came forward, and he was a US base police patrol officer, and he's out on patrol, and for a laugh, he put on extra lights and had his blues on and reds and drove through the wood. The basic problem with that is there's no record of that on any of the base blotters, that record comings and goings off the base. Secondly, you couldn't drive a car through the woods there. Even when Penistone and Burrows went into the woods, they left their Jeep quite quickly because they couldn't go any further, even along a logging track, and walk the rest of the way. So that's just nonsense. Just to prove the point, how this material is manipulated, this is published from a published article in the British Astronomical Association's magazine for the time. And it's talking about the re-entry of the Cosmos 749 rocket. The first thing you notice is it was December the 27th at 9 o'clock at night, which is a long way away from December the 28th at just after midnight, isn't it? But why let the facts get in the way of a good story? And you can see here that the spy satellite re-entered and burned up predominantly over southern England. It was seen all the way across, and by the time it got to the Thames estuary, it had more or less finished burning up. And this map here shows that the last place it was seen from and was south from Clacton, and that was the last visual sighting of it. Incidentally, there's only one recorded bright fireball roughly at that time, same time as the incident. That was on January the 3rd, okay, and that one was seen possibly from Nottingham. Originally, the best viewing will take from Gloucestershire, but there's even an account of it being seen from Essex briefly, but certainly. it's nearly a week too late to be anything to do with the Rendlesham Forest Incident. An interview in the East Anglian Daily Times. Now, this is interesting. Brenda Butler, who wrote the initial book and did most of the original research with Dot Street, she says, you realise they've got 8 landing sites down here. Everybody's got their own take on it. If you go down there with any of the witnesses, they'll take you somewhere else. And Mrs. Butler, who co-wrote the book Sky Crash, believes the US may have recovered a Russian satellite. It's got to be some. So in other words, 30 years, 40 years after the event, she suddenly changes her mind from being, one of the greatest exponents and supporters of the Rendlesham Forest Incident. She suddenly starts saying it was nothing, it was just a Russian satellite. And yet, strangely, she continues to turn up at every event at Woodbridge to do with the RFI and other events around Britain, and give regular guided tours of the forest. I mean, I've been with her several times in the forest, and she's actually pointed out a landing site to the west of the road that runs past Folly House. So, in between Bentwaters and there we are. I suppose it has to be said, if sales of your initial book are beginning to stutter a bit, then you change your theory and write another book. And it's interesting that Jenny Randalls has done just such as that. And she, in one of her recent books, she describes it as the Rendlesham Incident. There we go. The significance and true events of the Forest Incident, in my view, are clouded by certain things. People seeking fame, notoriety, celebrity, well, no names, no pact rule, but there are people who organise events, who write books, who do public appearances. I was recently asked to go on Good Morning Britain. And I asked what the basic theme of the piece was going to be and how it's going to be treated. And when I heard who the other people involved were, I knew it was just going to be done in a jokey way. And it often is, these things almost always are. Hosted, any documentaries on TV tend to be hosted by comedians or Danny Dyer or people like that. So yeah, there's no end of people who want to get involved who only found out about it 5 minutes ago. Individuals try to earn their money from writing, lecturing. Now, of course, I've done 3 lectures at Woodbridge and elsewhere on the subject of UFOs, but I've never lectured, I've never attended any of the conferences at Woodbridge to do with the RFI. I've never spoken about the Rendlesham Forest Incident or anything to do with it. I've spoken about astronauts, many of whom I've met, and their opinions and their experiences of the UFO phenomenon. I've spoken about the orb phenomenon. And I've never earned any money, and nobody's ever paid me for doing any talks, even though I've talked to groups of several thousand people. And my books certainly don't earn any money, but they're cathartic to write them. But some people do make a living out of it. Again, I'm not going to name any names, you know who they are, but they're always the first people to turn up on the TV or radio, give public appearances, they lecture, and they got hundreds of books. I have to say this, it may not be a popular thought for some viewers of this, but any aspect of the paranormal, whether it's ghosts, whether it's the UFO phenomenon, whether it's cryptozoology, Bigfoot, Loch Ness, etc., it does attract cranks. There's no easy way of saying it. I was watching a program the other day, about Bigfoot. I was going, God, these people are certifiable. The thing is, the problem is you take a genuine occurrence or a genuine observation, and it will attract people of this sort, and they almost turn it into a cult. And you see them at all the same conferences, all the same meetings. You see them, and unfortunately, they're quite often they're not only have a very loose connection with reality, but they often know very little about the facts of the thing. So if you were to ask them about Bigfoot, they'll start blathering on without, about Gigantopithecus. You say, what is Gigantopithecus? I have no idea. It's something they read somewhere. And it's the same with the RFI. If you go to some of the big meetings, you'll find there are people there who literally, are flaky. There's no other way of putting it. And they can be threatening if you question their integrity or question their point of view. Some of them can be quite violent. Pseudo-experts who try to fit the latest to the few known facts, well, they're always turning up, aren't they? And it's just so frustrating. I would never pretend I know everything there is to know, or even a large part, or even a significant part. All one can do in life is try and find the first-hand information, to talk to people who are involved in things, and to investigate for yourself. I wrote a book about a Loch Ness Monster back in 1972, and I went to Loch Ness as a complete skeptic, because I'm a biologist originally by training and qualification, and I went to Loch Ness with a guy who was a chemist, and we studied the thing we stayed for 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks again. We did chemistry, we did ecology, we did water chemistry, and so on and so forth. And then you come to the conclusion it couldn't possibly exist. There's absolutely no way a large animal could remain undetected in Loch Ness. Unfortunately, one occasion, driving on by the side of the loch, funny enough, to visit another author and reporter, Nick Witchell, we actually saw it at close range. So, you know, my opinions on Loch Ness had changed straight away. But it was, you know, it was after a considerable amount of reading and research and several years visiting the loch. But there are people who have theories based on the last book they read. And of course, the last, you know, the whole importance of the forest incident is misreported. Sometimes that's mischievous. They do it on purpose to make they do it in a good jokey kind of way. They you know, everybody associated with it as a lunatic, etc. Or it may very frequently just be ill-researched. I mean, any newspaper or TV program that claims that a bright fireball had been recorded, or that a Cosmos satellite re-entered at that time, they're either ill-researched or they're just lying. And of course, deliberate disinformation to discredit genuine witnesses. The genuine witnesses, and there are several, you know, authentic ones, particularly people like Colonel Holt. There's all kinds of disinformation is deployed against them, and that's true of any UFO thing. You know, I suppose it started back with Roswell in 1947, when Jesse Marcel was made a complete plank, you know, by being forced to make a retraction. And I was lucky enough to have a correspondence with his son, Jesse Jr. And he, you know, it's one of the things he was quite bitter about, the way that his father's reputation was besmirched, you know, and that happens all the time. And just to underline the thing, you know, this is Professor Brian Cox, and this is what he said on a primetime TV show, on the Rob Brydon show. No UFOs have ever landed. No one's been abducted. It's all bollocks. Now, I'd like to know what Professor Cox's mandate for having that opinion, or his basis for that opinion. The guy is, if he's anything, he's a particle physicist. He's not an astronomer. He's certainly not a ufologist, and he certainly has never researched the thing in any depth. You can tell that by some of the other statements he makes on the telly. But because he's famous, because he's eye candy, you know, he pops up all over the place where his opinion is neither warranted nor balanced. And this is a classic example of that. It used to really amuse me. I took part in 3 of the BBC's Stargazing Live productions, and it used to amuse me. They trotted him out. The guy's not an astronomer, he's a particle physicist. And so therefore, you can guarantee that virtually anything he says on these programs about astronomy that isn't involved with cosmology, you know, and the actual fabric of the universe, where particle physics is just something he's learned from a script. So what he's got to do with UFOs, why anybody feels his opinion matters, I don't know. So that's the talk as we gave it. It's a very diluted version. I hope you enjoy that. This will be on YouTube for a week or two and then taken down. Okay. This coming week, so that'll be the 8th, Thursday the 8th. The second part of this, which is slightly more contentious, we'll be looking at the situation from 2010, December 2010, the 30th anniversary conference at Woodbridge, which did really stir up a kind of hornet's nest. So, as I say, I hope you've enjoyed that, and